So someone in the comment section said, Jesus said his kingdom was no part of this world. He kept out of politics.
Oh, my.
Okay, so.
Oh, my.
I say this all the time. Borrow this from Joe Boot. Politics are nothing more than legislative morality. So it's not a question of, are we going to legislate morality, but whose morality are we going to legislate? Christianity cannot exist separate from politics. Like, again, because we're talking about moral objectives here, objective truth, objectively righteous laws and decrees. And the early church was a direct affront to the political system. The term Jesus is Lord, no king but Christ,
a political statement, because what people were saying is there's no king but Caesar. And so when the Christians started saying there's no king but Christ, they were getting put to death for that. Right.
That is a political statement.
Yeah. The political authorities of the day understood.
Yeah, exactly. And so to suggest that this is why I think, I don't want to rabbit trail too much. This is why I believe our culture is where it is, because the church has had that mentality that we don't get involved in politics, and therefore we just let the culture just do what it wants, right? And we let them legislate what they want because that's political, and Christ isn't Lord over that realm. And so, we're getting into two kingdom type theology here now, and
then we're surprised when it, forgive me, but goes to hell.
Exactly. And one of my favorite verses in Proverbs is where there's no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. Blessed is he who keeps the law. That's what we're seeing. The people have cast off restraint. There's been no prophetic vision, meaning the church hasn't proclaimed the lordship of Christ into all areas of life, including politics. And now we're seeing that people have cast off restraint, and that's where we're at. But blessed is he who keeps the law. That is a biblical principle.
Yeah.
And you can't avoid that. And to say that as Christians we should avoid that is just saying that we need to just sit back in our little bunkers and let the culture do its thing and just wait for Jesus to come get us. And I don't see that anywhere in Scripture. It certainly doesn't jive with the Great Commission. That's for darn sure.
Right. And to the point that Christians have abdicated their duty in political involvement, we see it as dirty. We see it as something that's worldly, right? Not as heavenly. It's a distraction from kingdom work. But I just don't think that could be any more mistaken. Politics involves people and the laws that govern them. So all public policy, whatever it is going to be driven by a moral vision.
Yeah.
It's just inescapable because politics involves how we treat people. And what are people? Right? If you're going to make the claim that Jesus didn't have anything to say about politics, what did he affirm? He affirmed that people are made in the image of God and that a moral vision will guide how we treat them. And when that vision is secular, pagan, or otherwise non-Christian, the social fabric of our society crumbles. It breaks down. And only a biblical world and life view that is rightly applied can lead to the kind of social flourishing that allows us to continue spreading the Christian message and doing evangelism and discipleship. So there's a beautiful relationship between the political sphere, the responsibility of civil government, which God gave as a ministry of protection, Romans chapter 13, to punish evildoers and reward the righteous. But we have such a deficient theology of the state in evangelicalism today. When you mentioned the Great Commission, Jesus commissioned us to disciple the nations. That would include those in authority over the nation.
Yeah.
Right? It's a ministry to the magistrate. So to say that, just because Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, meaning that his kingdom does not advance in the way that the kingdoms of this earth do. Right? What does he say? He says, the lords of the Gentiles lord it over them, right? They hold their authority over them. And the way that Christ's kingdom advances is through servant dominion. That's why magistrates are called ministers of justice. That's what the word minister means. Servant.
It literally, Romans 13 is deacon.
It's a ministry of public justice.
Yeah.
That's what civil servants are charged or commissioned by God to carry out, is a ministry of public justice. And they're going to do that by way of a particular moral vision.
Mm.
It's either going to be quote unquote secular, a rejection of God and his moral laws and norms. It's going to be pagan, informed by some aberrant worldview, or it's going to be Christian. And which worldview, which moral vision leads to the flourishing of human civilization? I think we can look at history and see in the Western world which societies have had the most blessing from top to bottom. Talking about any kind of area, education, government, healthcare, arts, literature, the scientific advancement, care of the vulnerable and the innocent, treatment of the poor, the elevation of the dignity of women. All of these areas, Christianity is radically superior than anything that has come before it. It has elevated society to such an extent, and that politics has a role to play in that. There's no getting out of that. So even though Christ didn't lay out external plans for setting up a just public order, he did give us certain principles, knowing that the power of spiritual liberty would produce the form of political freedom, right? In other words, what we see in the public is a reflection of people's hearts.
Right.
And that's why men need to experience the liberty of the Spirit of the Lord. And that leads to liberty in a nation from a public perspective. Because here's a couple things that Jesus did affirm. He did affirm that the Lord is sovereign over the magistrates. When he goes before Pilate, Jesus said, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above." So he's asserting that civil government is delegated and it's controlled by God, and that all rulers everywhere are accountable to their maker. And then second, what I just said a minute ago about government officials being public servants, right? Unlike pagan systems of government, civil authorities can't dominate the people. They serve the common good of every individual. And they punish evil, and they reward righteousness. And Jesus, when he's quoting the Torah, he reinforces that man is made in the image of God in the Gospel of Matthew. And that is the basis for the foundational concept of equality under the law and the principle of justice that we value to this day and apply to all people. And then he also acknowledges that there is a difference between the role of the state and the church, that they have different functions, but God rules over both. The church has the keys, while the state bears the sword. So the ability to enforce public justice doesn't belong to the church, right? The church can't execute criminals, and neither does the worship of God belong to the state. The state can't come into your church and tell you how to do worship.
Right.
And lastly, I love it in the Sermon on the Mount. People will look at, what Jesus said about turning the other cheek, but they don't understand that what he is affirming there is to the judicial civil magistrate and the principle of what's called lex talionis, the eye for eye, right? He affirms that in the case of this interpersonal dispute right here, like if it's a backhanded insult, like let it be water off your back. But he's pointing to the Old Testament law, saying, you have heard it was said, and then this is the standard of God from the Older Testament, eye for eye. He affirms that that falls under the purview of government rather than individuals.
Yeah.
So what is he saying? He's affirming that the state is still subject to the standards of divine revelation. Because what does Matthew chapter 5 say? He didn't come to abolish the law.
Right.
He came to fulfill it.
Yeah.
So again, that's all I'll say. But to this idea that politics is irrelevant, Jesus wouldn't want us concerned with it, there's a couple things to consider.
That was excellent, dude. Thank you. Yeah, in the last part of the Great Commission that is seemingly always missed, always forgotten, is teach them all that I have commanded.
Right.
So what is encompassed then in all that he has commanded? We would argue that means the law. We're talking about the civil law there, moral law. So like, yeah, you can't separate the two. We can't think like that. We can't act like that, because when we do, we end up with what we're dealing with right now.
The sponsor for this week's episode is Heritage Defense. Heritage Defense is a nonprofit legal advocacy organization dedicated to advancing the kingdom of Christ by protecting and empowering the biblical family. If any three-letter agencies show up at your door, have peace of mind knowing that an attorney who shares your values is available round the clock to advise and advocate for your family. Protect your household today. Use the discount code Apologia and get your first month's membership free. Visit heritagedefense.org for more.